find a way.
Trevor, so glad you are here. Such an interesting guy. I, like many people in the area, follow you on social media, and your perspective on so many instances of injustice in our society and in the local area. I don't think anyone else is doing this. And it's like local newspapers used to do that, but where their resources have kind of dried up, right? They're not doing much of that anymore. And so what fascinates me about you is when most people see injustice, they just keep walking. But not you. Like you never keep walking. As soon as you sniff injustice in the local community, like you are all over it. So I'm curious, like when you look back on your life and your childhood, when is the first time that you saw injustice and you confronted it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Matt. I mean, this is a great conversation.
Yeah.
Honestly, my story started when I was 13 years old, and I myself was a victim of the very crimes that I often talk about and cover, and sexual violence as a young teen, and seeing later on when I went through therapy and really understood what happened to me, knowing that this happens to so many others, making sure that anyone like younger me has a voice.
How self-aware were you at the time? Like that's pretty young to be a victim of abuse like that. Were you just surviving at the time, and then later you realize this is like I really want to be a voice?
Yeah, so at the time it was unfortunately normalized to me due to the nature of it, and it took time through therapy and working to it and kind of bringing out those kind of repressed terrible memories and bringing them up and knowing what happened and verbalizing it and figuring out like that what happened to me kind of opened my eyes again to how many people this happens to, and realizing how unjust it is just that it happens, and how can we, make sure these people have a voice, but also make sure that we have a system that holds perpetrators accountable and protects victims at the same time.
Did you have anybody in your life at that time when you were in that place that helped you see it, or they modeled advocacy?
Honestly, not really. I didn't talk to anyone about it because at the point it was normalized, and also it could have been embarrassing at that point to even speak about to people. I didn't. It was just too complex to even wrap my mind around at age 13. But as I got older, I've seen a lot of voices, and just seeing anyone who stands up for themselves, I see a lot of victims who are their own voice, and they are the ones championing justice for themselves. And to know how hard it is to go through that, and not only go through it, but then be your own voice is incredible.
Yeah, the people that I've talked to, with not as many victims of abuse, but like addiction and a lot of those stories on this podcast, and it's a very lonely, it's a lonely place to be.
Definitely.
And when you're 13, like it's hard. You can't really advocate for yourself, and you don't have the experience to see the larger perspective. So at that time, that's a difficult time of life anyway. So it must have been immensely lonely in the social world of a 13-year-old. So how long did it take? Like, did that occupy all of your high school years? You said you did therapy, but how did you work? How many years did it take to work through that?
So the abuse lasted a couple of years. After that, I had separated any contact from the perpetrator, and had spent some time just being away from it and starting to realize what happened, but still not being able to fully comprehend it. And that's when I attended therapy during high school and was able to really understand what happened to me and work through it and get some kind of at least understanding, because there's a piece of closure in understanding. Being confused is such a hard part of it too. Like why, what, where, like all the questions involved keep you from that closure. So knowing what happened was a piece of the healing too.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pausing because I haven't heard it articulated that way. So trying to understand the why. Tell me more. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So just understanding the mindset behind somebody doing that is almost impossible to understand for any of us who aren't like that. But knowing that you're not just crazy and thinking this happened to you, or that you're not the only one, because when you first think of it, you start thinking, do you think you're like the only one that this happened to? This is like such a foreign topic. Like, will you just sound crazy when you talk about it? But then you suddenly realize it's something that unfortunately so many people go through, and knowing that gives some sort of peace that this really did happen. This does happen. I'm not the only person this happened to, but it's a very real thing. And so you don't question if you've just lost it because you know this is a real thing and you went through it.
And adults might have friends that help them. They've got relationships that help them answer those questions or validate them.
Mm-hmm.
But kids don't have that, and there's no safe space for, I would imagine, a kid to share this.
Right. And unfortunately, perpetrators usually take advantage of that safe space. They are someone in a position of trust that a child should be able to be safe around, and they're not. And that almost eliminates that place of trust, or that safe place, as you said, because now that safe place has been eroded with abuse. And
you think the perpetrators, the pattern is that's intentional, like they know what they're doing.
Yes, so there are definitely acts that are random, but statistics show the majority of these cases unfortunately happen from someone who knows the child already, whether it be a family member, a friend, or someone in a position of trust.
I think we've all heard that. Like you watch the murder, listen to the murder podcasts and all of that, and it's always a family, right? The suspects are family and close friends. And I guess I've always thought, or I've just assumed that that's because access, like they have access. But what you're saying is they also have opportunity in terms of placing themselves in that space that you've just described.
Absolutely. So one example I try to use is like a step parent. So you've got a child and their mother, and then who their mother is married. And so you've got mother has to go to work and stepfather stays home with the child. Well, at that point now, that dynamic right there has created a one-on-one moment between the child and the stepfather. And if that person is a perpetrator of this type of abuse, they now have access that most people would not with that child. That child goes to school around a bunch of people. That child is maybe at sports around a bunch of people. But at home, he is now one-on-one with this adult. So that access is much more difficult for a stranger who wants to perpetrate to have that same access, whereas this family member now has access anytime, and they're in a one-on-one scenario, and they already have a position of trust. This child trusts this person. They can almost manipulate the situation to normalize the abuse.
What is the, like, you live with these terrible situations. Like you don't walk by. Like I keep coming back to you stop and you live there. And so what do you see is the hardest part for moving on? Is it the therapy? Is it the finding people in their circle that they trust? Like, what is the path to, what's the path back to success for victims?
Right. Everyone's definition of closure is different, but it's all about finding that, whatever it may be. So in cases where the case has gone to the legal system, justice or closure may be justice, having, someone found guilty or sentenced to taking a plea and being sentenced for their crimes, having that legal battle over is closure to some, because that also has accountability.
Justice.
Yeah. So you have justice. A lot of people see that as closure, or being able to get their voice out and just be heard, having someone across from them to say, I hear you. I believe you. I believe your story. I believe you went through this and you're a survivor. And it's about knowing that their past and the traumas they went through are validated. And they hear that other people have gone through this. Again, back to my story, hearing that validates that this really does happen, and you can more so comprehend that it did happen to you.
So as you worked through your own therapy and that process for you, at what point did you become involved in other people's justice? Do you remember the next time that you saw something that you didn't keep walking?
Absolutely. So simultaneously, while I was working through what happened to me, in my freshman year of college, I had just left high school, and a classmate of mine, 1 year younger, and her mother, Gabby and Christina Kennedy, had been murdered here in Bristol in a domestic violence incident. And that, knowing her, even though we weren't close, even knowing her and knowing that this happened just down the road here in Bristol, was very eye-opening. And knowing her friends and her family, that case kind of changed my whole perspective on all of these issues, and it really pushed me to get involved and to not walk by anymore, and to know that these happen so much, but there is more we can do, and to advocate for victims and for the future and for legislation on these topics and all of that together.
Yeah, my daughter was friends with Gabby, and I remember her just wrestling with obviously the tragedy of it, but that there were so few signs beforehand. And I think, me looking at that from a little more detached, it's like it always amazes me how much is going on in people's lives that they don't show. Like,
right.
Everybody is fighting battles that you just don't know, and that's an extreme case, because they were pretty good friends, and she didn't know.
Right.
It sounds like you were her whole circle of friends was like that.
Right. Yeah, I had a lot of mutual friends with her, and almost nobody knew because she didn't share. And it was one of those things where she tried to still be a positive light, and that's something that's just so incredible about her. And I think that's why her legacy still lives on now, is even through all of that, she was a positive light. And to get back on what you were saying, everyone is dealing with something, and I think that also gets back to human decency. Knowing that the person that you're getting annoyed with in the drive-through line may be going home to those kind of circumstances. And so certain ways we treat people or get upset about, we may not know, we definitely don't know what these people are going through outside of the public eye, the public circle, who we've even seen in school every day. We don't know what they're going through at home.
Yeah. I haven't followed that case with Gabby, but can you tell us where that went? Because it sounds like that was one of your first experiences of really getting involved.
Yeah, so on the legal side, it was done after that day because the perpetrator had killed himself after taking their lives. So the court case had, of course, been halted, but there were charges prior to that against him, and that legal case was about to commence. But it was ended on the legal side, but then that really opened up the advocacy side, and we got together with friends of Gabby family and started the Gabby Foundation, an organization here where we advocate for legislation and for awareness on these topics.
Tell me about that. Like you're what, 20 at the time you're doing that?
Yeah, it was quite the field to walk into. Learning what legislation even is, how the process works. It was quite the mountain to climb, but it was very interesting to see the levels of that, and then also to have bring the advocacy to it. Opened a lot of doors into what we could hopefully accomplish.
So tell me what surprised you. I'm assuming you're 20, you probably went into that pretty naive
Yes,
to what you found.
absolutely.
Like walk me through that.
Yeah, I didn't know how. I knew the basic steps to how a bill gets passed, but not in the state legislature and the exact things it has to go through. I didn't know exactly what laws were on the books at the time, what could be changed, how you can change it. I mean, the whole mountain of legalese, as they call it, the way laws are written, was definitely eye-opening because you can change one word in a law from can to must, and it changes the whole definition of the law. So it's
Mm.
breaking down the intricacies of whatever you're proposing to make sure that it's going to work and not have unintended consequences as well.
So your whole foray into that around Gabby's case, did you see things that you felt like could have been like laws that had would have been in place that would not have happened, to her?
That was what we initially jumped into, and it's a hard question because there were no huge failures to point to. The system acted in the way it could. The
Hmm.
detectives on the case worked so hard for her and her family. The advocacy groups here, there was so much work done to help them. It ultimately fell on the shoulders of the perpetrator, but we looked at it as not as so correcting that case, but being trying to be proactive in terms of future cases, what can help in those. And so the first bill that we got passed was the Gabby Act, and it is now in law in Tennessee. And it requires every DA's office in Tennessee to assign a prosecutor for all crimes against children, and they have to attend yearly training because, as we know, these, especially with the use of the internet, this has become ever evolving. The way people perpetrated against children 10 years ago has changed to what it is now, and in 10 years from now, it'll be different than it is today as we sit and talk.
So you helped push that legislation through, but before, like that seems like a pretty common sense thing. There's a crime against or an accusation against a child, then a prosecutor would get involved. But clearly that wasn't the case. So tell me what, like, how was it before?
Right. So they had every office has X amount of prosecutors, and the DA at the time decides how they become what kind of cases they're involved in. So you'll have some that'll focus on drug cases, some that'll focus on crimes against children. So some offices, including the one here in Sullivan County, had already assigned a singular prosecutor to cover these cases. So this law would just make that uniform across the state. So there were
Okay.
prosecutors covering these cases. This law just says you have a specific prosecutor assigned to these.
Okay.
So they were already getting prosecuted, but by possibly different prosecutors. This streamlines it with one person who is going to be getting yearly training and probably training throughout the year as well. And they're going to be the one working with local law enforcement, local advocacy groups. That's the go-to person that is going to just spearhead all cases that have crimes against children. And they can give 100% of their effort into those cases as well, instead of having maybe a case from a different topic and then a crime against a child. They've got all the crimes against children. And of course, any other prosecutors they need, they can bring in. It's not just a one person doing everything, but that is their wheelhouse, and they focus on that, they train on that, and then they become very strong in these cases to help ensure justice.
Yeah. I had one of my favorite podcasts I've done was with CASA,
Mm-hmm.
court appointed special advocates for kids. And I had no idea just the sheer volume of court cases involving minors and the just overwhelming volume on the system. So I can only imagine that prosecutor who is tasked with crimes against children, that must be a really heavy position.
Absolutely. I've talked to multiple in the state, and it is on all of them. They're great at what they do, but it is heavy, and they have to see the the evidence in these cases, the stuff that we hear partially about in these trials on TV. They have to see it. They have to sift through it. They have to decide what can be used in court. They have to decide what level of criminality each thing is, where they can charge it at. It becomes a whole intricate process, and they're very good at their jobs, but it's a very difficult thing to do.
Is there? I can only imagine you can only do that for a certain amount of time before you have to move. Like, you can only carry that weight for a certain amount of time as a prosecutor.
I couldn't imagine doing it for too long, but they're great at what they do, and it's such an important job that they're good at it and that they care. You won't find a prosecutor in that specific role, especially, that doesn't care. It's beyond just doing a job, clocking in, clocking out. They really care about justice and about making sure there is accountability and fairness to victims.
Yeah. You talk a lot about the perpetrators. Who have you seen that are the heroes of the story? The prosecutor obviously has a role, but who are the other people that act as the heroes in this?
The first line in all these cases is law enforcement. A case gets to a prosecutor after it has been investigated. So the first people to hear the cries of a victim, to see the wounds, are law enforcement. Local law enforcement, the detectives in that division, they are interviewing victims. They are looking at oftentimes very disturbing evidence. They are hearing, again, the cries of the family, and they sift through all of this and create a case that can be brought as in prosecution. And so local law enforcement has a very thankless role in that, and they do a lot of hard work to make sure that justice is brought and that it can be taken to the level of being prosecuted in a court.
So is that triggered by a domestic a domestic abuse call to local law enforcement, and then local law enforcement shows up on the scene and they're having to unravel this? That's the first line, and what they do with that and how they do it?
Absolutely. So it could be a call to the house. It could also be a tip sent in. A lot of times it could be from a school personnel. So if there's a child that's exhibiting symptoms or signs of abuse, the school personnel are actually required to report that. And when that comes through, when it gets to the point of criminality, you'll have law enforcement looped in with the Department of Children's Services, and they will investigate and bring about whatever justice there is and bring that to prosecutors to then bring that through the court of law. So it could be through a tip brought in. It could be through a victim who previously went through this and called the police themselves. Or it could be they show up to a house and realize there's something going on here, and they dive deeper into it in a case, like you said, like a domestic abuse call, and they realize there's a lot to this, and they investigate and figure out there's abuse in the home.
Yeah, police are getting a lot of bad PR right now, but you're pretty clear on them being the heroes of this story.
100%.
Yeah. So that's where it starts. And again, I go back to the conversation with Casa, because you just don't know until for those of us that have not been through this process, you assume the system functions in a certain way. Right. And then I sit down with them, and Isaiah House is another one. And you hear stories about kids being separated from their parents on this day, and I think they called it separation day, where the case escalates, and there's a certain day where the child is separated from their family, and they're taken to an office and sometimes spend the night in some municipality office, and Isaiah House is providing the housing.
Right.
This is like the worst. It's described as the worst day in a kid's life, and there's just strangers in an office there. So, for me, you think this, you have certain expectations for the system, and then you dig into it, and there's these massive gaps.
Absolutely, and there's unfortunately such an overwhelming volume as well, and that also sometimes creates gaps. When you build a system that seems it's going to work, You look at it almost like a bridge, and then you cover it and cover and cover. And there's so many cases that sit on top of it, it begins to break, and then you start having these holes that have been created because not by anybody's intentionality, but so many cases, unfortunately, where children have been abused at any level, neglect, abuse, sexual abuse, whatever it may be, and then their cases are all being funneled in, and it just overwhelms the system, and then you naturally have these gaps, and it's about finding these gaps and also being able to support the volume of cases, because if there were only a few, you would have a lot more attention being able to put on them, and you wouldn't have
Yeah.
the gaps. But so the volume creates gaps, and so it's about supporting those who are overwhelmed with the volume, and then hopefully keeping those gaps from being created or worsened.
Yeah. When Casa or Casa, I don't know how you explain it, but when she was talking through it with me, like the sheer numbers, like you're talking about thousands and thousands of active cases just in Sullivan County during a year, and the resources just aren't. There's not many people. Like there's not that many prosecutors, and so they provide volunteers to kind of step into that role. Isaiah House provides volunteers to step into certain of those holes. The numbers are so overwhelming. It doesn't sound like there's a solution to this. Is it always going to be overwhelmed with the sheer volume?
Unfortunately, as the volume sits so high, there will always be at least a section that there will be a part of it that is overwhelmed. It'll be, can we reach the point where we can match the resources to the volume? But that's a lot harder said than done, because you can't just throw anyone in those positions.
Yeah.
Again, back to what I was saying about the prosecutors and detectives, these people really care.
Yeah.
You have to have people in those positions that aren't just there to clock in and out. They really care about what they're doing, because these are overwhelming cases. These are hard to do. And you have to be able to find people who are passionate and care enough on such a voluminous level that you can match the volume of cases coming in.
Yeah. And for you, it's got to be it's got to be overwhelming. Like it's got to be overwhelming for you with all of these cases and just the overwhelming nature of it. How do you identify where you can be most useful? Like where do you perceive your time and energy being most valuable?
Yeah, I always try to fit myself into doing no one else's job. And what I mean by that is a lot of times when these cases come up, people want to help investigate. They think they've solved the case. We've got detectives for that. I'm not trying to be a detective when I do this. I'm not going to be the judge or the jury or the prosecutor. So you leave those to the professionals. But on the advocacy side, there are gaps for example, a missing persons case, getting flyers out and getting the community aware of what's going on, or a case of injustice where a child has been murdered, getting out on social media and making people aware of what has happened and the circumstances of the case is something that I can do that is not stepping on anyone else's toes, but helping the victim or the family of the victim in the case of a murder.
Yeah. And it's all of this is so it's also difficult. And it's like the rush to judgment on social media. So
Absolutely.
Social media's you've got to see social media as a double-edged sword. Like that's the answer and probably also the problem, right?
Absolutely.
How do you tell me how you see that and how you manage it?
Yeah, the thing is we can't control what other people are going to say, but there is that very big population that do rush to judgment, and that's the population you're getting that are wanting to be the detective on the case, the judge on the case, the jury. They're ready to convict the person off of one news headline they heard. But they don't understand every single tip that law enforcement gets. They have to follow up with. They have to build a case. They have case files sitting on their desk of everything they've talked about in this case, because they have to, when you find someone, you also have to look at, okay, we believe this person did it. But we also have to know these other people didn't do it. And so it's breaking all that down and building a case that not only is good enough for Facebook users, but is good enough for the court of law and can provide the proof needed to get a conviction against someone who did something like this. So there will definitely be people who rush to judgment and grab their pitchforks and run to the front lines of Facebook comments to convict somebody, but it's about keeping it balanced. And I try, when I talk about cases, to keep it balanced. Here are the facts. Here's what we know, and keep it there and not speculate, because I don't have any experience or knowledge of what happened beyond what we know. I can't just make up in my head, well, I'm believing this happened, so I'm going to present it as fact. I'm going to give what the facts are, and once they further and we know more, then we'll bring the facts as well, but avoid the speculation.
In your experience, is the truth often more complicated than it originally appears to be? Or is the truth usually the simplest answer?
It can be either. So sometimes the truth is too boring for people, and you'll have a case where people are convinced they've seen something like this on TV, where there's 5 different suspects, and it's this whole intricate thing because Hollywood made it into a very wound up scene because it's TV, right?
It's a story. It's got to be a great story.
Right. But when it happens in real life, people aren't making it into Hollywood. This is a real life scenario. So sometimes you will have one person who commits a heinous act and people will believe there's 4 other people involved with zero evidence. Or you'll have situations where people decide in their head what has happened, and they've decided that X, Y, or Z has happened, or this person or that person has done it. And then when they find out it's somebody else, they just refuse to believe it because their theory has overtaken their reality. They can't look at, well, the police have done a 9-month investigation, a case file this thick saying, here's who did it.
Yeah.
But I just believe on Facebook or on social media that someone else did it, and that's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah. Well, we do that with politics and religion and everything else on social media, right? It's like an oversimplification of things is what sells.
Sports as well. I mean, you look at when college football is on and people have 1,000 opinions about everything, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So how do you, you have put yourself in the thick of it for all the right reasons, and anytime you stop and call out justice, you become part of the story, right? That's probably unavoidable.
Right.
You have decided that your role is important enough to do that and put yourself out there, which we need more people doing that. The apathy, the few people that are doing that is a problem in society. So I really applaud you for doing that. I'm curious how you handle those dynamics, because when you put yourself in there, here come the comments.
Right.
And the misinformation and the oversimplifications and the overcomplications. How have you learned over this journey to manage that and also keep yourself healthy?
Right. It's been a process, and learning also what matters and what doesn't. So a random comment from an anonymous account won't bother me, but knowing that the family of a victim feels heard does matter to me. I have been out on a search before with the family for a family member, for an adult family member, and I heard the screams and the cries of the family when we discovered their missing family member deceased. I've heard, and those are the moments that stick with me, not the comments or opinions people may have. It's those moments. Or I've sat as far as I am from you with a family who had their child murdered, and I've cried in the same room with them and heard their story and been there in those moments. And those moments are what stick with me. And so when I look at what matters and what doesn't, I try to prioritize if I'm making sure that the family or the victim is heard and that they're okay with this. And that's what matters to me. You're not going to make everyone online happy, but my role isn't to do that. My role is to help a victim and make sure their voice is heard, and that I'm here to support them.
Yeah. Did it take you a process to figure that out?
Absolutely. When I started this and started posting about cases, I'll be honest, I definitely was one to go back and forth with anyone who had a comment. I would say, I was 20, 21 years old, somebody would say something and I would just go back and forth, and I'd find myself arguing for an hour with someone I don't even know halfway across the world, who has an opinion that is not going to change.
Hmm.
And I knew that time and those resources that I'm spending doing that could definitely have gone to one, anything else that would not have, pulled down my mental health by wasting that time, and by spending it advocating. Whether it is working on a new law, working with families who have been victims, something positive. And when I realigned my priorities, I realized helping these families is what matters to me. And making everyone happy isn't. I try to be professional and keep things factual, but you will always have the outliers in there. And I just try to remember what the priorities are and what got me into this and why I'm still in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a lot of wisdom that people could apply to their whole social media. Their whole social media life is like, what matters, and who doesn't matter.
Right.
There are some nasty comments. Like, I am struck by any local news, like anything, evokes some really nasty comments. Like, have you grown to understand the whole nature of like trolls and people halfway across the world that are weighing in? Like, who are they and why?
Right. Yeah. I've grown to, again, prioritize what I see and know what matters, but I'll never understand the mindset of someone who can get that upset over issues that some issues don't even affect them, and a lot of issues don't affect them directly. Like, people will say anything that happens in our country affects them. Well, a lot of the things that they're very upset about and being very hateful about might not even affect them directly. And even if they do, none of that is positive conversation. I meet with legislators, and on either side of the aisle, I'll meet with people who are advocates. I'll meet with law enforcement, school professionals, anyone in these fields. And it's about, my thing is working towards your desired goal. When people get online and they comment very hateful things, they're expressing their opinion about something, but they're making zero progress towards what they want. If they see something and they say, this is the worst thing ever, I want to change it, going in a Facebook comment section and cussing and telling people they're this and that and the other isn't working towards that goal. I'd rather go have a sit down with our local law enforcement and say, I'm seeing this I'm seeing this happen. How can we work on this? And it's getting progress. My thing is always, how can we make progress, not just make comments? Like, if I'm talking about something, also behind the scenes, I'm working on it and getting to the table and saying, how can we address this? And I think a lot of those people kind of skip that part, and they just think they're going to change it by being very hateful.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you read the comments?
I do. I see them.
Yeah.
I don't respond to people, but I don't respond to hateful comments, but I definitely see them. You get all of them, or people who accuse you of being involved for the wrong reasons, or who just are very upset that you're covering someone they know who have done something, and they get very upset at you. This is my family member. How could you say that they did this? Well, charges were brought in a court of law. This, a judge has determined that there is probable cause that your family member did this. And so there's a lot of different dynamics, and there's a lot of emotions in serious crime.
Yeah.
You're going to have people who are very upset for a victim. You're going to have people very upset on behalf of a perpetrator if they know them, love them. It's very high stakes. So I try to give people the benefit of the doubt that if they're coming into my comments and yelling at me, they're very upset, and engaging in them in that moment would do no good. Maybe if they wanted to speak to me a week later when they've calmed down, I'd be happy to have a conversation with someone.
Yeah.
But in that moment, in the heat of emotion, it never helps. It just creates stronger emotions, and it never goes anywhere.
Yeah, that's almost universally true, isn't it?
Absolutely. But then I'll have times where it'll be a week later, and I'm like, I'll reach out to someone and have a actual productive conversation with them. Hey, this is how I heard about this. This is what the court has said. And, I understand where you're coming from, but I wanted to share this perspective.
So you'll intentionally let a comment sit, like if you feel like you need to defend yourself or defend the victim or whoever it is. You'll intentionally let that sit and then come back a week or two later, and you actually can have a constructive.
Absolutely. And some people, there never will be that constructive conversation, but some there are. And it's worth giving the person that chance, because, like I said, in that moment, they were very upset, but that angry comment probably isn't 100% who that person is. They're in they're in a very vulnerable emotional state hearing about this case, and they just need time to get back to, an emotional baseline, and then let's talk as calm adults, and we can usually find more common ground on an issue.
Yeah, you never know. You never know what's going on in somebody's life,
Right.
and that applies to the Facebook commenters as well.
Absolutely. You'll have someone who has been accused of a crime like that that was innocent, and they'll be in there, defending, well, you can't rush to judgment because I've heard of someone who was accused, and so you'll have somebody could have that perspective on it. So are they just a terrible person defending predators? No. They have a perspective where they were falsely accused and now they have kind of an axe to grind on that end. Or there's somebody who went through something like I did or one of these victims did, and so they're very much quick to
Yeah.
jump against the offender. So you've got people who their life experiences kind of determine how they react. So
Yeah.
have to remember, not all these people are just coming at it from a detached scenario, but they have some kind of life moment, trauma experience that drives their anger or their emotion in this. So
Yeah.
giving them the benefit of knowing, well, this could be something that is very close to their heart. Give them time, and let's talk about it as adults.
As we talk, I'm struck by like all the different people that we've discussed. You have this capacity to empathize with each of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if your superpower is empathy.
I mean, it's something I've had to learn to have. And like I said, it's sitting this close to someone whose whole life has been taken from them, their child has been murdered, or being out in the field when someone finds their missing family member. Those things kind of really open my eyes to how hard those moments can be for someone, and seeing them and witnessing them, knowing something like this goes on in people's lives, like having that empathy is almost needed, because I know what I've seen what these people have gone through, and you just have to have some level of that, because there is so much that people can endure or see. And getting back to what we're talking about with Gabby's case that nobody knows about. And so you go treat someone like that poorly, and they may go home to a great home, or they may go home to in a terribly abusive situation, and the one time that they were free of that, you made it a bad situation. Their time at work that they finally had a break, you dogged on them and made them feel bad. Now their whole day is bad. They go home already having a bad day,
Yeah.
and then going home to the unimaginable abuses. So being able to be a break for someone is what we are as well. You may you may smile and tell someone I have a good day at the drive-thru. That may be what they need to hear that day. You may, bring your coworker their favorite coffee, and that may be what lifts them up for the week because nothing else has been going right.
Yeah.
So I think if we could all bring back a little bit of empathy and less rush to judgment, rush to hate, we could find common ground on a lot of issues, because a lot of times people do have common ground, but their emotions shield them from seeing that.
Yeah. I also think empathy is a character trait. Like I think some people's that's just, they have a well full of empathy, and some people are born with less. And you strike me as someone whose well is full of empathy, and that can get heavy because you probably carry a lot of responsibility in all of this. So are you learning how to, it's had to have been, because you've jumped into this, like it's happened fast, right? In the last few years, are you figuring out how to have boundaries and figuring out where your boundaries are, kind of like a caregiver has to learn how to do?
Absolutely. And also setting boundaries where I know that I give myself time to do something I like, and taking care of myself. And whether that be watching, I'm a big sports fan, so sitting back and making sure I can go watch one of the games on a Saturday or Sunday, or going out, and I mean, our area is beautiful, going out and taking a hike, going on a walk, just sitting outside, reading a book, something that takes me away from all of the other stuff. It's having that break that creates a balance, so that I know my whole 24-hour day is not going to be consumed. It's going to be however much time I can give to it, I will.
Yeah.
And then in the other, because you don't set the empathy down. It's just where are you focusing on it and not. Like when I go on a hike, I suddenly am not like, I don't care about any of these cases, right? Like you still have it, but you push it back and allow yourself to breathe and to enjoy something. And then when it's time, you bring that back to the forefront, and your empathy for those cases is back in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's easier for some people than others. Like compartmentalizing is
Hmm.
is another character trait. So those are great habits. What do you read?
Honestly, I read a lot. I love reading about history. I love U.S. history and
Ah,
reading books on our history. I mean, there's nothing in particular that comes to mind, but just I try to read about our country's history and the of course like legislative history. As I get more into that, I
mm,
like hearing about and how about our government and the structure of it, and then also learning more. I read books about the topics that I advocate for, so I try to read and learn more about abuse and about domestic violence and about
mm,
the way children are targeted, because I always try to grow my understanding so I can approach these better, because I never want to be in a situation where I feel like I know everything, because then at
yeah,
that point you know very little. And so I
yeah.
want to always be growing and be a sponge where I can soak this up and then come into a situation more prepared to advocate.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, can we go to the Megan Boswell
Absolutely.
story? Because that was in what, 2020?
Hmm.
Was it the year you graduated? You graduated that year. So you're a recent graduate, right?
Yes, sir.
The same what, like a year or two after Gabby? A
I.
couple years after Gabby?
Hmm. Yeah.
So take me back to the beginning of when you first heard this news.
Yeah, hearing that Evelyn was missing, because of course first it was a missing persons case. Hearing that was what it struck me, because it was such a young child, and I think in our whole area, knowing this happening right in our backyard kind of shook everyone up. And then as it worsened and it got the hope was going away that she'd be found alive as more time passed, and then you hear all these different stories being given out and false reports, and it became such a mess that I mean, it was heartbreaking to see. And then, of course, Megan was charged and it got into the legal system. And then you start hearing more details of the actual act of the murder. And that's just, nobody will ever be able to be prepared, no matter how many times you hear those details in different cases. They're always just as overwhelming when you hear them.
So you followed this case in real time.
Mm-hmm.
It broke with the local news media as a missing persons case. And so you were aware of that case
Yes.
at that point. And then when talk me through like how you lived that case in real time. Like when did it become national, and when did you get the first information about what had actually happened?
So when it first broke, it was just a local news story that she was missing, and not many details have been released. Law enforcement didn't know many details because they were being given all different stories. And then when it became a statewide alert, it became national news. A lot of times when children are that young and there's an Amber Alert, national media likes to pick up those cases, and so then it became a national
Is
story.
this over a couple days, or is it a couple weeks?
Within the first few days, and then even more so within the first couple weeks, because then more information starts coming out. And a lot of times when there's a wealth of information, national news can pick it up and really delve into it. Whereas the lesser the information, the less larger media is going to pick it up,
Mm.
because they want the details, the stories that they can really break into and analyze. So when more stories, more details of the story came out, it became more of a national and statewide and local story. I mean, we were living it here in our area, but also people were following it all across the country and across the world. I've had people who have reached out about that case that live in Ireland. They were
Yeah.
following the case from across the world.
Yeah.
But it just pulled their heart in, and they've been following it and praying and watching the case play out over those many years that it did.
Did the local law enforcement officers did they know what had happened immediately when they went on the scene, or did they find this out later?
So at first she was reported as missing, so they can only go off what they're given, so it was treated as a missing persons case. And then as they interviewed the mother and were getting multiple stories, of course you start to wonder, is one of these stories true or none of them true? Because they can't all be true. So then it's a question of, are we just getting, are these just wild goose hunt, or is there some truth in here? It's hard to decipher when all you're being given is a million different directions to run to. But they ran down everything, and you have TBI, FBI, local law enforcement, all running down leads, both in Tennessee, outside of Tennessee, checking everything,
Is she
interviewing
still missing?
everyone.
Is she still missing at this point?
Yes. And there's no evidence of where she is. Nobody can find her. And then a tip had come in about her being in the shed that she was found in. And ultimately, law enforcement came out that night and discovered her, and it was confirmed to be her. And that's when the legal process started. The medical examiner came out and did their job and took her and did their autopsy. And as it was found that she was murdered, it then became a legal case for many years because those trials, the case leading up to the trial, lasted a long time.
And she was found in a trash can on the residence.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. She was in it. She was in a shed inside of a trash can, upside down, and she had been very tightly wrapped when she was put in that trash can, to the point that her head had been bent most of the way back. I mean, it was a very brutal scene.
And it's on her, like it's at the side of her home. So there's multiple stories, but how did the case, like, was the finger pointed at her mother, Megan, right away? Was it clear? Or did this play out? Was there a mystery? Was there a mystery to it? Like, for us, kind of looking on the outside, because I didn't follow it that closely, it's like, how could a mother do this?
Right.
But like, was there a point in that case where we didn't know?
Right. I think it's twofold in that. Sometimes law enforcement has an early theory, but also they know they can't get tunnel vision. So they act on every theory. So while they're working it, they may be like, we really think it's this. But they were tracking down, they were talking to Evelyn's grandparents. They were talking to the man that Megan had previously been with, and went all the way down to, I believe it was Louisiana, where he was on base. And they went there and searched his barracks, interviewed him. They did the whole 9 yards. They interviewed everyone that they needed to and investigated everyone they needed to, whether they had a suspicion or not. Of course, as we've seen in the interviews and all the charges of false statements, Megan wasn't making a very good look for herself. So I'm sure, as the public was, law enforcement was probably beginning to realize they were being lied to. And so there's no incentive to lie in one of those cases. So that automatically makes you suspicious. It's not enough to say you took the life of your child, but it's enough to say, why are you making stuff up when we're trying to find your child? Their majority of the public wouldn't make stuff up when somebody else's child is being looked for. Like, you have people who would, but you have a lot of people who wouldn't even want to give a false tip in somebody else's child's case. Imagine it's your own child.
Yeah.
And being able to knowingly giving false statements is only going to slow the process and lead law enforcement in wrong direction. So then you have to question why. Why are you doing that? And that leads to suspicion. And then, of course, when she's found, it leads to enough evidence that she murdered her.
And how long did it take? How long did it take you to realize, like, this simple answer is the answer? Are you because you're following this closely, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is during COVID, so
Right.
it got even more attention than it normally would. But you were following it in real time. Did you have inside information, or were you just following it on the news at this point?
I'd just been following it on the news, listening to the statements from law enforcement and from our local news, and whatever had been being said, kind of piecing it all together, watching TBI and others make statements on if they were following up on a lead in one place or the other. And of course, or very early on, it looked like Megan had done it just by, again, her statements. I'll never understand who can knowingly make a false statement in the search for their child, because there's nothing else that matters in that moment except for your child.
Yeah.
So you should be willing to talk, but not only willing to talk, willing to be honest.
Yeah.
Because also, I'll tell you, in those moments, law enforcement is first and foremost focused on your child. They're not trying to pick up on any small incriminating things you'll say, like, oh, I have some this in my house. Like, that's not, they're not looking at that in this moment. They want every truth so they can find your child. And there's no excuse to lie in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So that plays out, and you are following this like on a daily basis.
Yes.
And then she's arrested,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the whole judicial process. You stayed very close to this story throughout the whole judicial process.
Right.
Was that your first time really following a case closely, from that perspective through the judicial process?
It was, especially early on in her case. That was the first real look I got at the judicial system, especially for a case of that magnitude.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. I mean, the system is very overburdened with cases, and these things get delayed very easily because there are a lot of rules and technicalities to follow that ensure fairness both towards the victim but also towards the accused. And so a lot of those were invoked, and I know she had removed counsel once or twice, got a new lawyer, so that changes things because you have to be given time to prepare with a new lawyer. So different things had been kind of used, whether strategically or not,
Yeah.
to prolong the case. So I mean, it took 5 years, and then you finally had an actual trial, which happened, and that really brought it to a head because then all the details of the case get brought out at trial. Anything that was found in the investigation is getting brought out on trial, and it's all in testimony under oath in a courtroom. So you're hearing everything and seeing photos, and the whole case gets brought forward, and then it goes to a jury, and she was convicted.
Yeah. For those of us who have never really followed a trial at that kind of minute day-to-day level, what would and this is happening in county
Yes.
court, right? Sullivan County Criminal
Yes.
Court. It doesn't happen every day, and the kind of media spotlight doesn't happen every day in Sullivan
Right.
County courts. What would surprise? What did you find that would surprise people about that?
The length, the amount of details and length. You'll have everybody brought in for a 5-minute hearing to determine if they can delay the case, if it needs to be prolonged by how long, and that can all happen very quickly. You'll have, well, they're supposed to be here at 10:10. By 10:20, they've already left because both parties have agreed to extend the case by 3 months. And then so then they're not even coming back. So those dates are very tentative, and I try to remind people when cases start, early court dates are very tentative. If they set a trial, her trial was supposed to be years before it was, and it just kept getting delayed. So when you see those dates, there will be something on that date, but it's very common that it's nothing. Not every court hearing is a huge outcome. It's not going to be the first time they come in here, you did this, you're guilty, you're going to prison. It's usually, you've been charged with this, we have housekeeping, as you call it, to go over, and then you come back later. Whether you're currently incarcerated, you go back to jail and then come back, or you're out on pretrial release and then you go back out into public and then come back to your hearings. But a lot of those hearings are very boring, as the public would say. There's not much to them, except for when you get to the certain ones like the actual trial, that's when everything comes out.
Yeah, it's not a 30-minute episode of Law and Order, right? Like it's in the minutia of it. In that trial, what were there's plenty of blame to go around. Like when a child is murdered like this, like there's plenty of people to blame. Who in that trial do you point to as a hero? Or are there any?
It's hard. I mean, there were people, very brave people from Megan's life that spoke up under oath about what they noticed and things that they kind of brought up at the time, and seeing how Evelyn was treated. But it's always a question of, how much should somebody speak up? Is it the age-old question is it enough? Did you say enough? Did you speak up enough? And it's always in hindsight. So hearing these trials, we hear it now, we can pick apart what they did and didn't do back then, but we weren't in those moments. And there's a lot of emotion and people who are just naive to things, and they, it's hard to pick it from there. But I will say the case was done so well. You've got the medical examiner's office was a big one in that case. They brought in another expert who was very, very strong in court and proved, in my opinion, well, in the jury's opinion as well, that this was a murder and nothing else. And she was very well prepared and really cared. And so I'd say You have, medical examiners, you have the detectives working alongside the DA's office. It was very much a team effort. So I would say the entire team that put this case together, not just enough to arrest and so the media can say she's in jail, but enough to bring about a conviction in front of a jury, because those are two different bars to set. You can find X amount of evidence to put somebody in jail, but to bring about a strong enough case that in trial in front of jurors that you don't know who they'll be, what their mindset will be. It's just people picked out of our county, making sure that you can prove to them that this happened. And so that entire team put together just an amazing playbook almost. They put so much together that once it got to trial, they knew what they were doing. There was no question about their evidence or their strategy.
So very professional.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because the podcasts always make the small town, the small town police and judicial system out to be amateur hour and make a mess of things. So it's good to hear from your perspective that wasn't the case here, that the heroes were those were some of the heroes of this story.
Absolutely. I mean, they put in more effort than people know. Like, I've got to know a lot of these people who have worked different parts of the case, and I'll tell you, I mean, the amount of time that law enforcement poured in, they were out day and night. It wasn't like I said, but not people who are just working to clock in and clock out. People who were working until she was found. People who didn't sleep much at all until she was found.
Yeah.
Prosecutors who have all these other cases, but made sure to give so much time to this case that they built a strong enough case that they would for sure be able to convict her, and working through all of this and putting so much time, effort, and passion. There has to be a level of that with them too, and they all have that. And so bringing that about, I mean, it was, I don't want to say there's never any situation that's flawless, but as close as you can get. Wow. They put so much effort into it, and it's definitely something to be commended.
Yeah, that's good to hear. When a light is shown that brightly on a family, there had to have been extraordinary dysfunction in this family. Did that just, as the trial went on, did it just like peeling layers of an onion back in terms of just more dysfunction piled on dysfunction?
It was, and seeing, the story from her mother and her mother's criminal history and the potential abuse that took place in the home that Megan lived in, even. I mean, you have generational trauma that carries down, and it just becomes, you usually see that where you've got the entirety of a family that has had some part of trauma, whether as a victim or a perpetrator of a traumatic experience, and then it kind of snowballs. And like you said, you peel it back and you see all this other stuff, and then you have to divide what could have almost led to this, but also the culpability still falls on the perpetrator. And so while she may have gone through what she did, Evelyn didn't have to go through what she did. And so drawing that line between, Megan's life probably wasn't perfect leading up to this, but there was still no excuse to take her own daughter's life.
How do you, that's always, I'm naturally empathetic as well. And I look at these cases, and I usually have more empathy for the perpetrator than probably the general public at large. And I think it's just because I'm like you, like I have an empathetic kind of personality. And it's like, how do you draw that line? Because Megan was, like you identified, like she was a victim, and then she became a perpetrator. Like, how do you work that out in your mind?
It's hard. There's not a definite line to draw. In every case, it can be, the line can be moved. The bar has to be set for what has happened, what circumstances. I mean, it's difficult, and it's also being able to have things that are, aren't mutually exclusive. You can say it's very bad what somebody went through, and then the way they used it was very bad too, because you can use what you go through in a positive light or in a very negative light. And so you now have these cards that you were dealt, and you shouldn't have had to be dealt them, but you were. Now at that point, what do you do with them? And you take those cards, and in her case, she took those cards and made a very bad move, and took the life of her child, who had no part in handing her those cards. but she took the life of her own daughter as a result of whatever it may have been that led her to do that. But it's about, yes, she went through this, but you still can't do what you did. And especially to someone who had no part in that. Evelyn had no part in anything that had traumatized
Yeah.
Megan. She was a baby. She was a light. She was a gift, as most parents would say when they have their child as a gift to them, right? Like this is a blessing, not something that you see as like an annoyance that you want to get rid of.
Yeah. Yeah, and so no matter what cards were dealt, you land on the side of you have responsibility for the actions that you take regardless, or otherwise none of it makes sense.
Right. And I do empathize, I absolutely, with what they went through. It just still, there has to be accountability because it can't be a situation of excuses. It can be a reality of this sucks, and it sucks all around. This is a bad situation, and we hate to hear that she went through what she did and then did what she did.
Yeah.
But you still have to draw the line of both can be true. It's a terrible situation what somebody would have to go through, but it's also terrible what they did with it. Because again, they were dealt those cards and they chose how to play them.
Was there ever a time during that trial where you felt like you understood her more? Because from a detached perspective, she's like a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I always push back against ideas that people are monsters because we're all more complicated than that. Was there any part in the trial where you were able to see inside of her head and motives and more than a monster?
I tried. I'll honestly say it's hard. I don't think I was ever able to reach that because the level of violence, like the no regard, especially in the situation of how the murder was taken out. I mean, there were multiple layers to wrapping her face up so tight and covering her mouth and stuffing her in a trash can so hard that her bones are not in the shapes they should be. I mean, the things that in that moment, knowingly doing that, I'll just never understand. Being able to look at your child and physically do those things, hands on, because she did this hands on her child, and being able to sit there and do that. Those are things I'll never be able to try to correlate to.
Were there indications of that kind of monstrous behavior before? Like, surely this isn't the first violent act in her history.
That was the question. There was really nothing that people said, like, leading up closer to the murder. Some people saw her taking less care of Evelyn, but there wasn't anything that people witnessed with her child or anyone else that would indicate she's this violent. And that's the thing a lot of times people don't see, is like a lot of these people are just right among us. There's not like a special community of people who hurt children or hurt others. They go through the same grocery aisles you do. They drive the same streets you do.
So yeah, you've got a really interesting perspective on this because you follow these perpetrators so closely. So you're saying that's not necessarily unusual. Like, I look at that and say, wow, like, how could that be the first violent act that she did? Like, how could no one...
Right.
Yeah, how did she not display indicators of this before?
Right.
This. And I look at that and say, wow, that's odd. But you're saying that's not unusual.
Right, especially with young perpetrators. See, what we're seeing a lot of times, too, with the murder of children, you're seeing a lot of young perpetrators. And so this may be their first act. Now, if you see someone much older commit these acts, there probably is more of a trail of violence, not to that extent, but something. Like, was there continual abuse? Was there that escalated? Because that happens a lot, too. You'll have somebody who starts as a domestic abuser, and it leads to murder because they escalate and escalate and escalate. So you could have a situation like that, but when somebody's younger, they are just a couple years removed from high school and are having a child, and this is kind of their first real responsibility. Like, it's a different world when you have a child in your care. It's not like, you have homework to do in high school. This is a whole new world. And so they almost walk into this new world, and that's when their first violent act comes into this new world of parenting. And that's when they start to display this, whatever is leading to this violence, and it becomes, unfortunately, fatal in a lot of these situations where they kill a child, because children are they're very vulnerable mentally, but they're also physically vulnerable.
Mm.
Very little. I
Yeah.
mean, these people, they're not able to fight back like if you went and tried to do something like that to a grown adult, right? So these children are very vulnerable, and people unfortunately take advantage of that.
Vulnerable to extreme actions.
Especially violence.
Yeah. I had Margaret Firerobin on, and she introduced me to the idea of resilience. Like, what makes some people resilient through trauma? And, having a kid, if you're a single mother, that can be a traumatic event.
Right.
Like, it's like, what makes people resilient through trauma and not? Like, what's the difference? And the idea of resilience is that you need 3 stable relationships in your life to, like, have a good path through success. So, like, if you're a kid and you're trauma, like, three stable relationships in your life. If you have that, your chance of being resilient through trauma is exponentially higher. And I've thought about that a lot because it's such a simple idea. Like, have 3 people. Did she have any stable relationships in her life?
It's hard to know, but it seems by the testimony that was given, she had friends who were very much there for her and had offered to take care of Evelyn at times, and were close with her both prior to her being pregnant and after. And so I think it almost came down to, this was her decision. She had that, and she could have pushed through and balanced the life, but it is harder. Being resilient is harder. So I think what it seems like, just based on what we've heard, is she had that path and she came up to it and decided the resilient path would be more work and more responsibility, whereas taking the life of her daughter would make her basically responsibility free.
Yeah.
She could do what she wanted and be a young adult enjoying life in her eyes.
Yeah.
She could go travel with a boyfriend or do this or that and not have to worry about taking care of her child.
And it appeared like her friends, the little that I heard, they had no idea.
Yeah.
And again, like, you just never know what's going on through people's lives. Like, didn't know with Gabby.
Right.
Like, yeah, man, people are so complicated and so simple at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
One of the things I'm personally trying to work through is, like, are we the most complicated things in God's kingdom, or are we the simplest things in God's kingdom? And I keep going back and forth. So, man, what about you? Like, when you look at the future, like, you're doing advocacy work at the congressional level now. Like, you've been in the halls of Congress, really trying to shine a light on making a difference in Nashville, and lawmakers, a lot of lawmakers doing your advocacy work. And then you're also on the front lines.
Right.
So tell me about you. Like, what do you dream about?
I dream of, I want to see a world where not only are people held accountable, but also we can hopefully create a world where less people are victimized to begin with. I mean, I really push for accountability for perpetrators, but also every perpetrator accountable, there's also a victim there that had to go through what they did. And so creating a world where we have more resources, more education, and hopefully just a kinder world where people aren't as subject to violence or abuse or anything like that, where instead we have less victims. Because people still have to go through these things. And it's great when we see somebody being held accountable and sentenced to the sentence they should get. But also what we have to remember is there's a victim who has to live with what happened to them for the rest of their life.
And you're holding both of those right now. Like, you're not just doing one or the other. You're doing both. What are you working on right now at the legislative level that you think is most important?
One topic that I really care about is mandatory reporting. So every state decides who's a mandatory reporter of abuse in their state. Tennessee, it's very clear language, anyone. So it would be any adult in Tennessee is required. If they suspect, not just if they have proof of, but if they suspect any neglect or abuse of a child, they're legally required by law to report it. There's actually a penalty for not reporting it. But everybody in Tennessee. And then you have some states where it's profession based. So it'll say all school personnel. You'll have, counselors, therapists, doctors, nurses. I mean, there's a whole list of jobs, but it's not just everyone. So I'm trying to make it just uniform in each of these states where you delete the here's everybody that has to, and you just say everyone. Because at the end of the day, it also creates a collective responsibility. And we all have that collective responsibility to look out for children. If we see something that we see at a neighbor's house that doesn't look right, they're being way too physical with their child.
Yeah.
You have to step up. That child, that 5-year-old, 7-year-old child that happening to, can't step up for themselves. You witnessing that across the street, you need to pick up the phone or go on the website and report it. And so creating that standard of reporting, like I said, it changes the language of who needs to do it, but it also changes the culture of who's responsible. It's no longer, well, my job's not on there, so am I even somebody that needs to report it?
Yeah.
Whereas like in Tennessee, everyone has to report. And I like how the way it's written because it's everyone. It's anyone. It's if you took your kid to a birthday party and witnessed something, you brought another kid over for a sleepover for your kid's birthday party and you witnessed bruises all over the child. You're not a doctor. You're not the teacher of the child. You're not their soccer coach.
Yeah.
So you're probably not in those professions, but you very much saw signs of abuse. And that parent right there has the same responsibility, I feel like, as a teacher does to say, hey, I saw something that's not right. And then it can be investigated. And it could be something benign that there was no wrongdoing. The kid's very clumsy and got hurt. It could also be the kid's being abused at home. And so it's stepping up and creating that culture of we all are in this. It takes us all. Whether you're a parent, coach, whatever, or you're not, and you have no involvement with children, but you see something, you should say something.
So a kid's at my own kid's birthday party, and they say something that leads me to question maybe they're being abused at home.
Right.
Or I'm a soccer coach, and a kid confides in me. The legal requirement would be for me to do what?
In Tennessee, it would be to report. You have to call or go online to DCS, Department of Children's Services, and file a report. You can be anonymous, or you can name yourself. So if you have any fear of, retaliation or that they may find out it was you, then you can be anonymous, or you can give your contact information, and then they can even follow up with you. But it's getting on there and making that report, and then it's out of your hands. You said something, and then it goes into their hands, and they have to investigate it with a certain amount of time. And then if there is abuse, law enforcement gets involved. It becomes a process with everyone, and the child will be interviewed, the parents. It becomes there's a whole investigation done. But making sure you step up, not thinking, well, somebody else definitely already reported that. We don't know. There are plenty of situations where people think it's been reported 10 times, it's been reported 0 times. So you just need to be the one. Even if you are the 10th, it's better to be the 10th than to have the potential to be the first and not be the first.
So there's a hotline, basically, that you can do that anonymously.
Yep, you can call the hotline or just do it online. If you don't even want to speak to someone, you can go on their website and file an anonymous report.
Yeah.
And they'll take care of it.
And you think that is the most meaningful thing right now to alleviate the number of victims? If people would do that, it would have a real meaningful effect.
Yes, it would hopefully stop abuse earlier, so it would be discovered before it became prolonged. And also it would bring about a cultural shift where we know we're keeping our eyes out for everyone else. Where people, because abuse lives in secrecy.
Yeah.
So if we eliminate secrecy by saying we're all going to look out for everybody else's children.
Yeah.
If we see something, we're going to say something. You're now creating an environment where people feel less secretive.
Yeah.
They can't be as secretive. They can't do it in the confines of secrecy when we're all saying we're going. It's like, reminds me of like Neighborhood Watch. You ever drive to a neighborhood and there's a sign that says this community is monitored by Neighborhood Watch.
Yeah.
What that means is all the neighbors there, or most of them, are looking out for their neighbors. If they see someone suspicious at a house down the road, they're going to call the police, not just if they see someone suspicious at their own home. And we can have that same mentality with children. You're not seeing it happen to your own child, but you're seeing it happen to another child.
Yeah.
You still need to report it.
It's very countercultural. Like, our culture is so extremely individual. and individualistic. Like it's to an extreme, right? Like it's when you look at history, like our individualism is
Right.
like next level.
It is.
Like one of the themes in this podcast is like people doing big things and they're creating villages, because that look out for one another
Right.
in various parts of society. But it's really difficult to do because you are fighting this individualistic culture.
Right.
And you talk about the neighborhoods, like it's pretty unusual to know any of your neighbors.
Right.
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 Like
Absolutely.
only in America in 2020s is this normal. So yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but it's also, but what I've also learned from talking to people is it's the challenge, but it's also the solution.
It is.
And unless there is a village, there really aren't solutions to this.
Right.
Proactive solutions.
Right. And there's a lot of complaints. It's very easy to complain about the system, but it's about finding solutions. And I very much pride myself on being, not a problem solver. I'm not going to say I can solve them all, but finding solutions, bringing everyone to the table, sitting down with again, police chiefs, detectives, school personnel, medical professionals, law, legislators, subject matter experts, anyone, and just having conversation, figuring out, getting input from 10 different people, and suddenly then you can kind of craft legislation or policy that helps. And it's just having those conversations, less about, just raising your pitchfork and getting mad, but saying, what am I going to do with that anger? I think we all get upset that there could be an injustice against a child. I think for any of us that upsets us. But what can we do to find solutions?
Yeah. So do you find yourself, you must have to nurture those relationships for quite a while, multiple relationships, to get the trust and participation of all those different parties?
Absolutely. I mean, it's networking is a huge thing for me. So meeting with these people and telling them who I am and what my goals are, but also proving that, showing them, the work I've done and sharing, that I'm not here to like nitpick their conversation and go out and tell everybody what they said. Like I want to have a conversation that is beneficial and useful. And we have those with a lot of different agencies. I meet monthly with the Department of Children's Services because they're rewriting policy to do with missing children in their care. And where I've seen cases of missing children in care that did not get the resources they should have, they've looped me in, and I, without publicly sharing what the policies are, I can sit there and have these conversations and have input. And I've had input on the kind of policies they're writing. And so it's those relationships that have been built over years that I care about keeping and about working with, because that's where we get solutions from. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, it's really, really inspiring. Like the solution, like the trial isn't a 30-minute thing,
right?
But the solutions to this are not 30-minute solutions either. Like they're the grind. It's the grind, and it's another example of how true that is everywhere. Like the solution, like making a difference is being resilient day after day and persistent.
There's a lot of behind the scenes that takes the majority of the time. Being able to get out and have like a press release of something that's been done. There's probably been months or even years of work behind the scenes that get to that. It's not just one day where you can craft this up and say, look what we did. It's for years we've been working on this, and we're glad we finally came to a solution. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. Thanks for like putting so much of yourself into this. I know it's got to be hard, and I'm sure it's a process of like those boundaries and trying to make a difference and still like carry that weight.
Right.
Because this is heavy stuff, man.
It is.
It's important. That's why you do it. We know it's important, and that's why we appreciate you doing it. So on behalf of the community, thanks for doing this important work on all facets.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Find a way.